This is why you should pull on Pepe's banner.
Think you the shit, bitch? You not even the fault.
Her banner basically is Gaviota banner version 2. Pepe, a unit that essentially holds down lanes with AoE to clear small pawns, and a sniper that has a partnership with Kim Jong-un's nuclear power plant. But there are obvious differences between these operators and their kit that help distinguish these characters as their own characters and have their own niche and uses. Pepe is an Earthshaker, a new guard branch when this character was introduced. This branch specializes in AoE attacks including enemies that isn't blocked by themselves, with the flaw of having a total of 0 resistance. Which isn't bad, but it's something that you should know. A lot of guards having also 0 resistance, and at the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal. Her first talent returns 1 SP to every enemy defeated during her skill, that caps at 14 SP. This talent is pretty good to manage her skill upkeep for some skills, and it's really good if you're trying to defend an endless horde of mobs. As for her second talent, it's just a straight up damage percent buff to all guards as long as she is deployed. Her skill 1 will deal 2 90% attack as physical damage and triggers like Siege skill 2, and can still trigger when she is under any negative status such as freeze and stun, and also she will remove the status effect of herself. This single niche can actually be really useful in some cases because it removes the effects, which allows her to keep blocking and attacking the enemies that she's blocking. Her skill 2 will give her Gaviota skill 2 range and provide her with 90% more attack, 80 more attack speed, and she will attack random enemies within the range. Each time the skill is activated, subsequent activations will give her an additional 40 attack speed up to 2 stacks. In my personal opinion, this attack is better than Gaviota skill 2 just because the AoE hits literally everything, as the chainsaw people only hit depending on their block count. This skill also pairs really well with her first talent, as you technically need 11 SP if she manages to kill 14 enemies during her skill. Her skill 3 will sacrifice a small amount of attack speed, but every time she slams her hammer, it explodes and stuns the enemy just under a second. The duration of the stun is increased on the main target that she slams, and every time that she slams the enemy, she will obtain an additional 25% attack, and the slam bomb gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. This skill is actually an insane AoE skill. If there is an enemy outside of her range, but an enemy is close to that enemy and is in her range, and she deals damage to that enemy, it will do damage to both enemies, which could come in clutch sometimes. Though this skill may not benefit her talent 1 as much, since you're probably gonna use the skill for much larger targets. For whichever skill you should prioritize, you should eventually level all of them since they all have their own uses, but priority order should be skill 3, skill 1, and skill 2. In no way am I saying that skill 2 is bad, it's just that I think this skill should be used for more endless wave type of stages, and that isn't as common as you think. Unless you're min-maxing the stage, her skill 3 downtime isn't too bad. Also, I don't like the RNG, it shouldn't be much of an issue though since it's an AoE skill. So yes, you should pull her. Narantuya is a loop shooter archetype. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, Sten, this is a new archetype. What does it do? If you are as ADHD as I am and decide to use your free time to randomly click buttons on the menu and navigate through the shop sometimes, You probably don't know or forgot that Paper is a free loot shooter. A loop shooter is essentially this, so it is best to utilize them by placing them in the middle of the Napoleon army. Not only because they use their loop weapon to damage enemies around them, they will not be able to attack again until their weapon returns to them, like a boomerang. So placing in the middle of everything will make the weapon return to them much quicker. This could also lead to moments where you could miss enemies that are too fast for the weapon. So if that happens, you might need to do something about that. Thankfully, not a lot of enemies run fast enough for that to happen. Her talent 1 allows her to steal stats from attacks. Whilst stealing on paper sounds like a busted effect, it's because it is. It buffs the user and it debuffs the enemy, which technically can only be brought to its full potential on bosses or big enemies, but it's not a massive debuff either. So in conclusion, it's a good thing, but not too good, but it's never bad. Her talent 2 though is her main talent and is preyed upon by all Narantuya users. She gets a massive amount of dodge percentage, almost as much as Flame Tail skill 2, and she reduces both damage type accuracy of enemies within the 8 tiles around her by 20%. This is her main source of survival when placed in the middle of the Roman Empire. Even though this is the case, she shouldn't always be placed in the middle of the battlefield. It's just something you can do because of this dodge value. Her skill 1 reduces her range so that her boomerang will do 190% more damage and can repeatedly jump between enemies up to 3 times. Although her range is reduced, her boomerang will still jump to targets outside of her range as long as they are close enough. This is a fine AFK skill if you like those things and are those type of people. For her skill 2, she will throw her boomerang that will initially do 250% attack as physical damage and slow the target for 1 second. It will do an additional 200 damage to enemies on the boomerang's return path when it travels back to her. This skill is an offensive recovery skill, meaning that it will not recharge when she is doing literally nothing. I think it's a fine skill if you just want to do extra AoE damage, but it's a fine skill overall. Her skill 3 will fling out 3 boomerangs, each dealing 175% attack as physical damage, and when all 3 projectiles return to her, she will do this thingy up to 3 enemies in the 8 tiles around her and slows them for just a second. This skill is actually pretty nuts. It does a good amount of damage against big targets that has a reasonable amount of defense stats. There's not much I can say about this skill except putting her next to an enemy for the bonus damage to take effect, and it does good damage. For her skill priority, I would most definitely say skill 3, skill 2, and skill 1. Whilst her skill 2 is offensive recovery, it doesn't change the fact that the skill itself does really good AoE damage and she can recharge her skill decently fast since she attacks pretty fast if she is placed near the opponents. So hitting the enemy 15 times isn't gonna take you too long, but if you can keep enemies under control on this cooldown, then it is worth leveling up. But offensive recovery can be very annoying sometimes, and it might just be me, but I don't really like it personally. If you like using it more though, or if you want to use it for more AoE situations, you should definitely level it. Her skill 1 as an AFK skill isn't anything too crazy. I think you should level it if you like doing AFK clears, but if it's just for normal gameplay, I think it is better to prioritize skill 2 and 3. So yes, you should pull her. Now, will I be pulling on this banner?